Good morning, Team Alabama. We are ready for some more Hidden Figures. Please turn on your Chromebooks to page 42 in your copy of Hidden Figures. Page 42, Trouble in the Lunchroom. In the middle of the day, the women of West Computing walked as a group over to the cafeteria. Langley was so crowded that each team had a designated 30-minute window for lunch, just enough time for a quick meal and a little conversation. Most groups sat together out of habit. For Dorothy and the West Computers, segregated seating was required. The women of West Computing were the only black women professionals at the laboratory, not exactly excluded, but not quite included either. A white cardboard sign on a table in the back of the cafeteria said "Colored Computers" in crisply stenciled black letters. It was the only sign in the cafeteria. No other group needed assigned seating. This kind of racial insult was all too common. It was a kind of subtle jab that African Americans had learned to tolerate, if not accept, in order to function in their daily lives. The women probably expected it, but in the environment of the laboratory, a place that had chosen them for their intellectual talents, the sign seemed particularly offensive. Okay, the movie shows this, and you can see this in the movie. There are also several vocab words in that last paragraph that I would like to add to your vocab. Subtle and jab, and then particularly offensive would also be several great words to add to the vocab. Also, if you can think of some questions right now, why were the ladies segregated? Did they do anything about it? Okay, ask some questions right there and put those in your notes. On page 42 at the bottom, at first the women tried to ignore the sign and they pushed it aside and tried to pretend it wasn't there. In the office, the women felt equal, but in the cafeteria and the bathrooms, the colored signs were a reminder that some were more equal than others. A mathematician named Miriam Mann finally decided that she didn't want to look at the cafeteria sign anymore. Not even 5 feet tall, her feet just grazing the floor where she sat down. Miriam had a huge personality. Okay, grazing the floor. What does grazing the floor mean? That'd be a great vocab word. Dorothy and the other West Computers watched as Miriam slipped the sign into her purse. Her small act of defiance made them all feel a bit anxious, but also empowered. But the next day, the sign reappeared. Miriam removed it again. This happened again and again for weeks. Sometimes the sign disappeared for a few days or a week, sometimes longer, but each time it was eventually replaced with an identical twin. As the sign drama played itself out in the Langley cafeteria, an important civil rights case was playing out in the courts. Irene Morgan, an employee at the Baltimore-based aircraft manufacturer Glenn L. Martin and Company, worked on an airplane production line. In the summer of 1944, Morgan traveled on a Greyhound bus to her hometown of Gloucester County, Virginia, next door to Hampton. On the return trip, she was arrested because she refused to move to the back of the bus. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund defended Morgan, and in 1946, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Morgan versus Virginia that segregation on interstate buses was illegal. What were the women at West Computing doing making such a fuss about a sign in the cafeteria? Outside Langley, serious civil rights battles were being fought on the streets and in the courts. They are going to fire you over that sign, Miriam, her husband said. But being black in America was a never-ending series of decisions about when to fight and when to let things go. Then they're just going to have to do it, Miriam said. Numbers are colorblind. Miriam and her husband lived near the Hampton Institute campus, not far from where Dorothy lived. Although the students were predominantly black, the school's president and many professors were white. Malcolm McLean, the head of the school, was determined that the school be committed to participation in the war effort. Under McLean's direction, the college established a U.S. Naval training school, effectively turning the campus into an active military base. Military police manned the campus entrances and patrolled the grounds. More than 1,000 black naval recruits from around the county were sent to the school to learn how to repair airplane and boat engines. The school was also dedicated to providing engineering, science, and war management training programs for people who wanted to work for the government and help America fight the war. As part of the program, men and women, including many of the women now working in the West Area Computing Office, crowded into the Hampton Institute classrooms to learn everything from radio science to chemistry to engineering. At a war labor conference the Hampton Institute hosted in 1942, the college president told attendees that the war could be the greatest break in history for minority groups. Many local whites didn't approve of McLean's progressive ideas. They were particularly upset about how comfortable he was with socializing with black people as well as white people. In speeches, McLean urged administrators at white colleges to hire black professors. He entertained blacks and whites together in the president's residence. He even danced with a Hampton student at a school dance, causing a scandal. He believed in the double V, victory in the war effort and victory on the home front. And he wanted to help African Americans advance in American society. On the Langley campus, most of the engineers were conflicted on the issue of race mixing. They may not have thought about inviting their black colleagues to their homes for dinner, but at the office they were friendly. The same attitude applied to women in the workforce. When there was so much work to be done, the engineers were open to giving a smart person, black or white, male or female, the chance to work hard and get the numbers right. The Sisterhood. As far as the West computers were concerned, they assumed that they would have to prove themselves equal to or better than the white mathematicians. Because of the discrimination, they believed that African Americans needed to be twice as good to get half as far as their white counterparts. The West computers rejected all notions of being inferior because they were black or female, and they banded together like sisters to help each other at work. They double-checked one another's work and policed each other to prevent tardiness, sloppy appearance, or the perception of bad behavior. They fought against negative stereotypes, and they knew they stood for something bigger than themselves as individuals. Miriam Mann and the women were no doubt delighted that at some point during the war, the colored computer sign disappeared from the cafeteria. The segregated office and separate bathrooms remained, but the battle of the West Area cafeteria was over. Even without the sign, the West computers still sat together at the same table. Now, however, they were able to enjoy their lunch and each other's company without staring at a humiliating sign. Many of the relationships that began in those early days in West computing blossomed into lifetime friendships. Blossomed might be a good word that you can add to your vocabulary on page 47. Dorothy Vaughan, Miriam Mann, and the other women of West computing became a sisterhood inside and outside of work. For ambitious young women with mathematical minds, there wasn't a better job in the world. Okay, you might want to add ambitious too. Page 47. That is the end of chapter 6. We're going to stop there for today. Have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama.